I was walking down the street in Paris, France, and I came across a house that was being renovated, and I found this old nail in the rubble. Ordinarily, an iron nail would be the most boring thing in the world. I mean, who cares, right? Well, this nail's kind of cool because it looks like it was made by a blacksmith probably a couple hundred years ago. But ordinarily, if you found a nail on the street, you wouldn't think anything of it. But really, the story of iron, from how it's created, to how it got to us, to what we do with it, is really one of the most amazing stories that can be told. Let me show you what I mean.
Born in one of the most energetic of phenomena in the universe, and almost always older than our solar system itself, not only is the story of how iron is made incredible, but also how it has come to be part of almost everything that we do. It would be easy for me to jump into how important iron is to all of us by talking about all the things around us made of iron. I mean, you are likely surrounded by iron right now. If you take iron and add a little bit of carbon, you get steel, which is just a very strong form of iron. And it's iron and steel that's in the nails, screws, bolts, and holds, well, pretty much everything together. Iron played a huge role in our tools, from some of the earliest hand tools to the machines that made almost everything that we have. The skeletons of our skyscrapers and the bridges that span vast rivers are made of it. You depend on some kind of iron box to move you around. The device you're watching this on almost certainly has iron in it. Think about it. Almost everything you do during the day somehow involves iron. But amazingly, iron is way more important than that. We are literally physically built with iron. Let me show you what I mean. Iron is why our blood runs red. The iron in your red blood cells is what carries oxygen and makes it possible for you to breathe. Literally every time you take a breath, the oxygen rushing in is binding to hemoglobin, which is based on iron. Iron is also needed for healthy cells, skin, and fingernails. Our bodies carefully keep iron reserves and jealously maintain just the right amounts. When our iron balance goes off by even a fairly small amount, it can lead to illness or even death. Iron is also vital to plants and is used in the creation of chlorophyll, the green stuff which converts sunlight to energy and powers the plants. Plants which don't get enough iron will turn yellow and eventually die. But I hear you say, I don't eat plants, I eat meat. Yeah, but the animals you eat are fed by plants, so even they are dependent on iron for their food. So pretty much our entire food chain is dependent on iron. Okay, iron is amazing, I hear you say, but where does this incredibly important element come from? This all gets very complicated really quickly, and I'm going to have to gloss over a lot, but stick with me here. As gravity pulls clumps of the stellar gases hydrogen and helium together, eventually the crushing forces of gravity produce enough heat and compression that the gases spontaneously burst into nuclear fusion and a new star is born. Fusion is where the atoms are literally moving so fast with such high energy from the high temperatures that they overcome the usual forces which would repel them, and instead they fuse together when other forces take over. When they fuse together, a new heavier element is born. But also, a tiny fraction of their mass is converted into a tremendous amount of pure energy. This energy keeps the temperatures high, and other atoms fuse in a long chain reaction that can last many billions of years. We experience this excess energy here on Earth as heat and sunlight. Relatively small stars like our own burn fairly slowly and can last for billions of years. But in some especially massive stars, which are far, far larger than our own sun, their huge size generates incredible amounts of gravity, and they burn much more quickly with absolutely insane amounts of heat and pressure. Over time, this incredible heat and pressure starts combining these atoms, producing heavier and heavier elements. Those elements, because they are dense, move to the core of the star and produce even stronger gravity, which drives the temperatures even higher. However, each new element requires more energy to combine and gives off less excess energy during fusion. Carbon, oxygen, silicon, sulfur, magnesium, to name some, but then eventually iron. And iron is very different. Iron is a dead-end element for a star because it's very stable and it takes more energy to make than it gives off when it undergoes fusion, and no star has enough mass to directly fuse elements higher than iron. While it may take millions of years to burn through the lighter elements, once you start moving up the atomic weights, the cycle becomes shorter and shorter. And then, after millions of years fusing lighter elements, the star has run out of lighter elements to fuse and it shifts to making mostly large amounts of iron. And once the star is making mostly iron, it may only have seconds to live. And that's when an insanely violent and energy-intensive event happens. With no nuclear reactions to maintain the outward push on the star, The outer layers collapse inward extremely violently at about a quarter the speed of light, and then explode outward as they bounce off the iron core. This is what is known as a supernova. When the Earth was forming, it was incredibly hot and molten. Because iron is denser, it drifted to the core of our planet where it is still molten today. Though iron seems abundant near the surface, the vast majority of iron on our planet is at the center, and that liquid iron is still moving and generating magnetic fields which surround Earth. These fields are known as Van Allen belts. We put the Van Allen belts to work when the Chinese invented the compass, which allowed ships to navigate in a completely new way. Ships could now travel further in all kinds of weather and out of sight of land with far greater confidence. This alone completely changed the fortunes, cultures, and course of human history. But the Van Allen belts also have another function, where they extend well into space, where they trap high-energy particles. These trapped particles form a protective layer around Earth, shielding us from much of the very dangerous forms of radiation found in space. This huge amount of space radiation that would likely kill virtually all life on this planet are deflected away from us thanks to the Van Allen belts. The Van Allen belts do something else, though. They keep our atmosphere in place. It's thought that Mars once had an atmosphere like ours, when it still had liquid iron in its core and made its own Van Allen belts. However, once the core cooled and the Van Allen belts that were protecting Mars disappeared, solar winds from our sun simply blew the atmosphere away. Should the center of our own planet cool down and become solid, not only would our atmosphere blow away, but we would all be fried from the intense radiation from space. But as if iron hasn't done enough for us yet, things really took off when humans started using iron ourselves. Remember that giant supernova explosion that flung huge amounts of iron and other elements out into space? Well, now you know why the meteorites that fall from the sky contain so much iron. And that's where the video before this one, Iron from Sand, picked up. In it, Celeste talks about how the first iron that humans forged was from iron-rich meteorites, because that was the only source of forgeable iron ancient people had. Humans eventually figured out how to make our own iron initially by using what is called a bloomery furnace. Celeste and a team of volunteers at the Crucible in Oakland, California recreated their own bloomery furnaces and smelted their own iron from a raw form of iron ore called magnetite, which is commonly found on the beaches and riverbanks in California, where it's been washed down from the Sierra Mountains. The team was making the iron to be part of an art piece, a fire pit, which was to be auctioned off at a fundraiser for the Crucible. But the iron they smelted wasn't the only iron in the piece. Actually, much of it was from the Old Bay Bridge, which used to span part of the San Francisco Bay. Everyone knows the iconic Golden Gate Bridge, which connects San Francisco to the Marin Headlands. But there's another bridge, which is in two parts separated by an island, which goes between San Francisco and Oakland.
Yeah, this is an emergency in San Francisco. What happened? There's a hell of an earthquake, and we've got...
In the 1989 6.9 magnitude Loma Prieta earthquake that rocked the San Francisco Bay Area, a section of the Bay Bridge on the Oakland side fell down, leading to one death. It took about a month to repair, but it was obvious that a new bridge needed to be built. Once the new bridge was finally done in 2013, the disassembly of the old bridge began. Most of the bridge material was sent off for recycling, but a small amount was given to artists, and the Crucible was eventually the recipient of about a 10-foot chunk. To be usable by the team at the Crucible, this section of steel first had to be broken apart. One of the coolest things for me to watch and film was the breaking apart of this chunk of the Old Bay Bridge. It was held together with tons of rivets, and they used nothing but heat and muscle to get it all apart.
Darn near 100 rivets had to be sheared off. Cutting it off was a pretty intense thing. Each rivet probably took anywhere from 10 to 30 strikes with anywhere from 10 to 18-pound sledgehammers. The magic of the dance between two people striking together and a third person holding the tool and moving down the path and driving out the rivets, hours and hours of energy and time spent. We got a couple of different parties together of 6 to 12 people rotating through one cut, 2 sledgehammers swinging, cutting the head of that rivet off, and then driving the rivet back through the piece until each of those plates or cross members were separated. Then we could then turn that into, plasma cutting off pieces of it. And that became what we forged thinner and wider to become the sides of our vessel that we're going to burn, the fire was going to burn in. As a team, as a community, as a family, working together to create something larger than ourselves. That last hammer strike that breaks that rivet, it's, I don't know what to call it, ultimately gratifying to be doing that, to this was a big chunk of a bridge and we just cut it apart with a bunch of small hand tools.
With all the rivets out and the bloomery smelts over, it was time for the team to start to build the fire pit from the iron smelted in the bloomery process and the parts of the Bay Bridge steel. It was originally designed as a round bowl, but it quickly became obvious it would work much better as a square. The team worked for weeks to get it ready, and I was there as much as I could, but there was still a lot of the process that I missed. In fact, the last couple of days it was near around-the-clock effort to get the piece finished, and pretty much no photos were taken as it came together in those late hours. The team was working non-stop on the fire pit up till about 20 minutes before it went up for auction. I can't emphasize enough what a team effort it was throughout the entire process. There really were a few dozen people who put countless hours over months into making this happen. So on April 6th, 2019, the Crucible held its 20th anniversary party, its Soiree. This is an event full of art, wonder, and great food with almost 800 people, with all of it benefiting the programs at the Crucible. The highlight of this event, though, is an auction with pieces made of the Crucible by students and instructors. And it was here, as they wheeled it out, that I saw the fire pit actually put together for the first time. It was really amazing to see it all come together because I knew how much work went into it. Now, I had been filming this process all along and was asked if I would make a short video of them making this piece before it went up for auction. For something very special like this, you're buying the story as much as you're buying the piece itself, so it's important that people know how all of this came together and the incredible effort that went into it. I can't tell you how happy and proud I was as the video was playing, not because of my work, but because I could finally share with everyone all of the effort and artistry that went into it. And here's the auction as it happened.
Very cool. We're going to open it up at $2,600. Now 38, 36 bit 38, 4,000 now 52, 5,000 now 52, 5,000 to 52, 5,000 to 52, 58, now $6,000, 6,000 now 62, 768, 7,000, $8,000, 86, almost as much as the bridge cost, 9,000, now 92, 9,092, 9,200, now 94, 92 bit 94, 92 bit, are you sure? 92 first, second, so 92.
Once it was over, it was on display and I could have a closer look and catch some of the crew members admiring it too.
So what do you think about iron now? Still just a boring old nail? Not only does iron run through our bodies and food, it is the core of our industry and economy. It was formed in giant stars, even this nail. And it protects us from radiation and keeps our atmosphere in place. And it gave us the compass, which by itself changed everything. Don't get me wrong, other elements are important too. I think for me, carbon gets a special shout out. But tell me what you think about iron or your other favorite elements in the comments. All of that said, I like the fun, creative things we do with iron too, whether it's artists making a fire pit or other neat stuff too.
Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.